Actually, I can look at the sound meter on the recording and see that even when I'm not speaking, there is sound coming in from this hissing fans. Just more and more details for you. Okay, so we are getting close to the end of this chapter on resistance to change and knowledge, and we'll mention a few points that actually can be helpful to overcome these kind of resistances. But let's first look at the technological lock-ins and 6 factors driving polarization of people. These are author's personal list. Obviously there are many people saying many other things as to why there are polarizations of people going on. Contexts vary. One recent opinion of the US polarization and the rise of Donald Trump is that the country very rapidly is moving towards secularization, and some religious sectors are feeling threatened, so they are fighting, and they use Donald Trump as their messenger despite all his shortcomings. Okay, so 6 factors driving the polarization of people. Economic inequality. As the gap between the rich and poor continues to widen, it can lead to increased resentment and mistrust between social classes. But not all poor people resent the rich or mistrust them, so we have to be careful. Political polarization. As political parties become more ideologically divided, it can lead to increased polarization amongst voters. This is true that ideological positions can be very strong, and cognitive biases and cognitive dissonance and social rationality, etc., begin to amplify the political polarizations, and sometimes fake news and social media feeds on top of those and amplifies the echo chambers. Demographic changes. As society becomes more diverse, it can lead to increased polarization as different groups struggle to find common ground. So there is always the old statement that diversity is strength, but it isn't always clear, because when migrants come in and they bring different values, different religions even, they can begin to affect the system in unintended or unexpected ways, because as they become a voting bloc, the politicians will cater to them and feed on their cognitive biases, which may be very different than the native population that's already there for a long time. Social media and the internet. Of course, the rise of social media and the internet has made it easier for people to find and connect with like-minded individuals, leading to increased polarization as people become more isolated in their own echo chambers. So you don't even have to go anywhere and meet anybody. You can sit in your room, look at your computers and your social media feeds from Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and so on, and you can clearly start to find groups that completely agree with you or disagree with you, so love and hatred can grow without ever meeting anybody. Populist leaders and movements, of course, can cause these. Populist leaders and movements that appeal to people's emotions and prejudices can exacerbate polarization by stoking fear and mistrust of outsiders and minorities. Donald Trump is hammering on immigrants, calling them criminals and not people, and it resonates with some people who just don't want immigrants. And then there are finer points made that legal immigrants, people from good countries, can be allowed. So obviously it gets a bit racist over there. Media bias. The way news is reported can also play a role in polarizing the public. Studies have shown that the media can have a negative impact on public perceptions when they present news in a biased or misleading manner. News is not just factual based news anymore, it's commentary, sometimes it's entertainment, and it obviously comes with lots of cognitive biases and confirmation biases. Education level and access to information. People with different levels of education or access to the same information can have different perspectives on the same issues, leading to different opinions and polarizations. I always find it a little too easy or convenient to say education level matters and poor and uneducated are easily manipulated, but it's the rational ignorance and people who are educated that are leading the system sometimes. And there is some nice work by Ian Kuzan from Princeton, I don't know where he is now, about working with fish, where he showed that some members of the group who are not as elitist and educated as the ones that are controlling the system can actually slow down the rapid push towards one direction or the other by the elites and prevent rapid move in the good or bad directions. And democracy is served well by people who are not as well informed, but how they are getting their information and how they think they got, who's giving the information, the credibility, legitimacy and salience of the person they trust can become a factor as well. So technological lock-in, resistance to change can also be driven by path dependence and lock-ins. To recapitulate, path dependence refers to the phenomenon where past decisions and actions influence present decisions and actions, and lock-in effects capture the instances where this forcing has become so strong that deviating from the path is onerous and even impossible. So people are just stuck in a rut. Technological path dependence and lock-ins introduce significant limits to adaptation, as additional decision and investments create an increasingly narrow path and gradually more daunting costs to deviate from it over time, a feedback loop where resistance to change becomes increasingly entrenched. One example I can think of is the internal combustion engines. We want to move to EVs. There is heavy infrastructure producing internal combustion engines, and some governments will continue to grow them while the market is good, and the EVs are growing but in a very small number. Then other lobbies come in from, let's say, internal combustion engine producers to say there is a range anxiety for EVs, the charging stations are not sufficient, and life cycle wise they are more expensive, and so on and so forth. So path dependence and lock-ins can as such be significant drivers of resistance to change, as they create a dynamic inertia that favors the established direction to persist. This pattern is not only visible in the prevailing dominance of inferior yet successful technologies that we talked about before, it's behind much of our persistent use of inferior yet successful technologies. So if I'm using a refrigerator or a washing machine provided to me by the institute, it's very hard for me to replace them, because this is just a temporary place and I can spend my money and do it for being the good citizen, but then I lose a lot. It costs me a lot, right? So it is behind much of our present use of unsustainable technologies, such as contemporary Western car use, and much of the reluctance to stop using fossil fuels in general. It's also behind the ever-present urban processes aggravating disaster risk by generating a radial extension of urban areas outward from a relatively safe center into hazardous locations. That's kind of a general statement, but let's leave it. Be it Oxford in the United Kingdom, Butte Meta in Nigeria or elsewhere, the areas initially settled are generally not exposed to any common hazards, so they are built organically around economic opportunities and resources like water. Yet regardless of when urbanization kicks in, the resulting path-dependent sprawling tends to eventually result in some people living in disaster-prone locations, which we see here. A disaster-prone neighborhood of Butte Meta, Nigeria, and this is common slums living in such informal housing, subject to lots of negative impacts, easily extreme rainfall, diseases, heat waves and so on, are common for all cities, because cities offer lots of livelihood options, financial opportunities, and housing is nearly impossible. So such neighborhoods begin to grow and they become almost permanent settlements, right? So we'll come back and read a bit about overcoming resistance to knowledge and change, and probably wrap it up with a little bit of conclusions on this chapter on resistance to change and knowledge. Obviously there are many problems, and the idea is to see if we can get on sustainability pathway, and if we can do it at a global scale, and if we can do it fast enough, because as we said, despite the decades of negotiations under the UNFCCC, we are not bending the curve, we are not reducing emissions, we are not even sure how close we are to peak emissions, and we are not anywhere close to being free of fossil fuels, even though renewables keep growing, EVs keep growing, efficient technology keeps growing, and net zero efforts continue to grow, at least in words, and carbon capture and sequestration efforts continue even though they are not yet scalable, and so on and so forth. So we'll see if there are ways to induce societal tipping points, as we said before, and as I said also, I have a podcast on how maybe that's possible. So let's come back and talk about overcoming the resistance to change and then conclude this chapter. Okay.